seconds to see if there's any stragglers, but we should be good to go. Thank you all for being here with us. If you have attended any of our silver clovers before now, we're so glad that you're here to join another one, and hope that you will learn a lot from our soups and stews class. So a couple things. We want to make sure that everybody can hear. So make sure that the volume on your device is turned up as much as it can. Also, keep your other windows or internet tabs to a minimum. That will ensure that there's no lagging or issues. We also are going to use the chat box for comments. So that's going to be, for me, it's at the bottom of my screen. There's a little chat bubble. If you have any questions, you can direct those there. If not, I will keep my eye out on the videos in case anyone needs to raise their hand, have a question. We also are going to keep everyone muted for the majority of the class, just so that our presenters can get through. So we have our 3 Master Food volunteers with us who are going to be presenting on soups and stews. And this presentation will cover a few things about making soups and stews from scratch and why that can be better than canned soup from the store. We'll also include a few tips and tricks for various different cooking methods of your soups and stews. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Miss Ann. Let's get you spotlighted. All right.
And good morning to everybody.
Good morning.
Pardon?
Good morning.
Good morning. We are going to look at cooking soups and stews on a traditional stovetop, in a slow cooker, and also in an electric pressure cooker, and also talk a little bit about how to convert back and forth between those two. So this morning, we're going to begin with the stovetop and the pumpkin black bean soup recipe, which I believe is on page 13 of your handout, if you want to turn to that. And we're going to get started first. We're going to get the soup started, and then we're going to pause, and we're going to talk about legumes. I'm a big fan of legumes. I hope you already are, and if you're not, I hope you'll be willing to give them a try after today's presentation. So on the recipe, we've already got some olive oil started in our pan. We like it to be at a simmer, and then we're going to add our onions, 1½ cups. Boom. And while we're talking, we're going to let those saute. And this is when I wish we weren't virtual, because when all the aromas start coming from the cooking, that's just part of the great experience. But this is also super. So why should you give a hill of beans about legumes? Well, first of all, they are one of the oldest crops known to man. There is evidence of culture of legumes as far back as 10,000 years ago. Here in the United States, our dried beans or legumes originated first from Central and South America. But lentils and dried beans come to us from Central Asia, chickpeas from the Mideast, you probably know that, black-eyed peas from Africa, and the adzuki bean from Japan. Beans are also very important for our ecosystem because they do a great job of enhancing nitrogen in the soil, and farmers often use that to replenish soil. So legumes isn't a word we use every day. And what the heck are they anyway? Well, they are simply seeds enclosed in pods. They can be beans, they can be peas, and they can be lentils. And we're going to talk about beans and lentils today. All legumes are very, very nutritious. They're loaded with nutrients. They have lots of protein, fiber, carbohydrates. B vitamins in particular, minerals, and they have a low glycemic index. They don't have cholesterol, and with the exception of soy, they're low in fats. And finally, they're extremely affordable. Well, the legume protein you probably have heard is incomplete, and that's true. Usually legumes are missing 1 or 2 essential amino acids. Grains, nuts, and seeds also are incomplete proteins, but they're missing a different amino acid. So if we eat in the same day both legumes as well as some whole grains and nuts, then we get complete protein in our diet. So we don't really need to worry about protein if we have a vegetarian type diet or if we have a day or two with a vegetarian type diet. I'm going to check my onions because I don't know if you can hear them, but they're just kind of cooking away over here. Give those a little stir. All right. Adding them, well, let me step back a little bit. So as far as if you're counting like how much you're eating every day, if you eat 1/4 cup of legumes, that's equivalent to about 1 ounce of a meat. If you eat 1/2 pound of cooked legumes, that's also equivalent to about 1/2 cup of cooked vegetables. So they really are both in the protein food group and in the vegetable fruit food group. But if you're counting, you don't want to double count. So you either have to count it as a meat or count it as a vegetable. That's your choice. If you want to add legumes to your diet, just like we're doing today, they are wonderful in soups and stews and casseroles. You can puree them. Who doesn't like hummus? But there are lots and lots of other dips and spreads out there that are not hummus. So you can have a lot of variety. You can sprinkle them in your salads and you can have them in snacks. Sometimes, you know, that 3 o'clock in the afternoon time when you're hungry, sometimes I just open up my fridge and if I have some extra beans in there, pop them in and they can satisfy your hunger for a long time. The next pitch I'd like to make is using dried beans. And I think in the kits that you got a nice bag of black beans. That bag of black beans is equal to 5 or 6 cans of black beans. So in that little package, you get a lot. Some people think it's a hassle to cook dried beans, and I get that, but there are many advantages to doing it. First of all, it's economical. The cost of dried beans is about 1/5 to 1/7 the cost of canned beans. You can control the salt content. Now, you do find canned beans that are at least low salt and sometimes no salt, but previously they were just loaded with it. When I cook my beans at home, my dried ones, I add no salt at all to them. So I know exactly what's in there. And then environmentally, you don't have that can. I know we recycle them, but there's the transportation of the heavy can, like 5 or 6 of those versus our little bag of beans. And there's also the processing of it. So what I normally do is, like with that bag you got today, I go ahead and cook the whole thing. And then I aliquot it out into 1.5 cup measures and pop it in the freezer. Then when I have a recipe that calls for a can of beans, I pull the package out, thaw it, and use it. Well, how do you cook dried beans? Always, always, always rinse and sort them first. Once in a while, there can be a little pebble in there. So you want to rinse them and sort them. Then you cook them. You can use the stove top. You can use your electric pressure cooker. With some cautions, you can use a slow cooker. The issue with a slow cooker is it doesn't always reach a high enough temperature to eliminate some of the toxins that are in a dried bean. And of course, that's important to do that. Once you're finished cooking them, again, you want to rinse them and drain them. So just think rinse and drain, and it has a lot of advantages. You can store them then for up to 4 days in the refrigerator, or you could put them in the refrigerator, the freezer for several months. Now, lentils. Lentils to me, I don't know if you can see some of those tiny ones there. They are what I call a small but mighty legume. First of all, you don't have to soak them. They cook very quickly. They cook in 5 to 20 minutes. You can make a fabulous soup. I think in your handout you have a Syrian red lentil soup. You can make it very, very quickly and enjoy it for dinner or lunch or whatever you want. Also, of all of the legumes, the lentils are number 2 in protein content. And finally, we can't talk about beans without talking about, that embarrassing topic that we all giggled about when we were kids. And some of us still giggle about it today. So how do you get by that problem? Well, if you're new to eating legumes, introduce them slowly. Introduce them in small portions. Don't mix them with other gaseous vegetables like the cruciferous vegetables. Add more liquids to whatever your recipe is. Be sure you're exercising, which of course we all should be doing anyway. And make sure you're preparing them correctly. If you are rinsing and draining them multiple times, you're washing away a lot of the oligosaccharides that cause the gas problem. There also are some herbs and spices that can be helpful. Ginger is one of them. There's a Mexican spice called, I believe it's pronounced epazote. And there's an Indian cuisine spice, asafoetida. And all of those are said to help with the gas problem. And of course, you can buy some natural products at the store. So that's it on dried beans. I hope you'll give them a try and enjoy them as much as I do. And now we're going to finish up our pumpkin black bean recipe. Okay. Got some nice sauteing here. The next thing we're going to do is add our 3 cloves of garlic. When you're sauteing, you don't ever want to saute garlic for very long. So if you're sauteing a bunch of vegetables, put the garlic in last just for a short period of time. We're going to throw those in. Then we're going to put the cumin in. Got that pre-measured. And again, if you could get the aroma of this, it's quite nice. All right. I skipped a little step. We have already drained our black beans and our diced tomatoes. And I've taken half of them and put them in a food processor because we're going to process them a little bit. If you don't want to use your food processor because there's a lot more to wash, you could also do this using your stick blender. We're going to use the food processor today. Line those up. Always stubborn getting off of there. Okay, I don't know if you can see how ground up they are. We're going to go ahead and add those to our pot. Does anybody ever have their blade fall into the pot? Happens to me sometimes. Not today. And then we have our whole beans and our diced tomatoes, the other half of them. So we're going to add those to the mixture. Okay. All right, and now we're going to add the remaining ingredients. We have got 3 cups of a vegetable broth. We have a couple of vegans in our family, so this is a really nice recipe for them. And I find that people who don't especially like vegetarian or vegan type dishes, like my husband, they think this is delicious. Okay, we got that in. We're going to add our black pepper. our sherry vinegar, a couple of tablespoons of that. And then finally, you were wondering when that pumpkin was going to come in. We're going to do 1 can of pumpkin. All right. We're going to blend that up, bring it to a boil, lower it to a simmer, and just let it simmer for about 20 minutes. At the end of the 20 minutes, we have a little bit of real sherry over here that we'll add. I'll be doing that a little bit later this morning, but let me just show you what this looks like. I'm going to spill it on the counter. Let me show you a different way. So now you've got a pretty hearty meal. Okay, so here's kind of let's see if I can get this where you can see it. A nice healthy setup. So we have our pumpkin black bean soup, maybe a little bit of colorful cornbread to go on the side, and a nice tossed green salad. Makes a nice whole meal. And I'm not very good about remembering this, but you know, we eat with our eyes as well as our scent and our taste. So if you want to put a little garnish in, you can actually garnish your bowl of soup with a little parsley or cilantro or dill or something. And there you have a very nice pumpkin black bean soup. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Anne. We do have a few questions here. We just wanted to confirm, should you always rinse and wash the beans before and after they're cooked?
Always.
All right. And also, do you need to drain the diced tomatoes before you put them in the soup? Yes. All right. And then along with the tomatoes, does adding them interfere with the softening process of the beans, or were the beans already cooked when you added the tomatoes?
Good question. Okay, the recipe calls for 3 cups of black beans, and probably we should say cooked black beans, or I think it's 2 15-ounce cans of beans, black beans drained. So yes, those would be cooked black beans. If these were dry beans, we would have to cook them for way longer than the 20 minutes. And we probably wouldn't be cooking them in with all of our other ingredients.
All right. What does the sherry add to the flavor of the soup?
When you add it at the end, it just kind of gives it a nice little brightness, I think, to the soup. I made some previously and we had it for dinner and we had leftovers, and we're going to have the rest of it tonight, but the sherry's already been put in it. So I'm kind of anxious to see, can we still taste it, or do we need to add a little bit more? I'm kind of curious. So if somebody out there has had that experience, or you might remember the steak soup from the Plaza 3, and they always poured a little sherry in that before they served it to you, just to give it that brightness.
All right. And let's see. I know there's a few more questions. Let me get them. Did you put all of the beans and tomatoes in the food processor?
I put half of them. So half of the diced tomatoes and half of the black beans were in the food processor. And then the remaining ones, which were also drained, we added those. So we had whole beans as well as chunks of tomato in the soup. So it's kind of a blend of a creamy, chunky soup.
Yeah. And then is there a substitute for the sherry if someone doesn't have it on hand?
I don't know. Maybe that happens to me sometimes because I don't really keep a lot of stuff like that. But I might try some brandy in it, maybe if you have a little bit of brandy. And it's not if you don't add it, it's not a showstopper.
Okay. And then we have one last question saying that they made the soup before and seems like they were missing something. The soup was a little bland.
No, I don't have I can't tell you why, but it surprises me when I made it as a test for this and I served it. It had a little bite to it that I didn't expect, and I liked it because I like spicy. So I thought it was flavorful, and my husband made the same comment, and he's actually really enjoyed it. So I don't know if it's a matter of taste or what the ingredients were. The one thing in it that can add bite to a dish probably is the garlic. So I tend to use big garlic cloves, and sometimes I throw in an extra one. So maybe a little more garlic in it.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to make that all the questions for now. There are a few more that we will get back to at the end. But for now, we will move on to Miss Sherry. Let's get you spotlighted. Thank you, Miss Ann.
Thank you.
All right, Sherry, you can take it away.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to my kitchen for this class on soups and stews. My segment today is going to be on slow cookers. And according to the research I've done, about 80% of the households in America have a slow cooker. So some of this information may or may not be new to you, but hopefully it will serve as some good reminders. I have 3 slow cookers in front of me here. This one, you can buy them in about any size you want. This one is a little more than a quart, and they go all the way up to 8 quarts from what I've seen available to purchase. In this small one, I've made overnight oatmeal. I've done hot spinach dip, crab dip, just a lot of things that you don't want to make a large batch of, and it works perfectly for those items. This one I like because it's a Selecta size crock pot. This is the 2-quart dish. It also comes with a 4-quart and a 6-quart. So you have the option of having one slow cooker that will fit your meal, no matter how many people you're cooking for. And this is my go-to slow cooker. It's a combination roaster and slow cooker. So instead of having the normal settings of high, medium, and low, it's actually got temperature settings on here, and the slow cooker settings are marked. So I feel like I get a better product out of this one for a couple reasons. First of all, it's oval. So I can fit a whole chicken or a nice big roast in here much easier than I can fit one of those items into a round slow cooker. Because it has more surface area on the bottom, my liquid is more spread out, so I can get more of my meat down in the liquid than if I'm using one of these. It's kind of a funnel shape. The liquid is all down there, and then your food products are kind of coming up out of the liquid, so they don't get quite as much moisture. This is also my favorite because this one weighs a lot. If you're looking to buy a new slow cooker, some of them can weigh up to 15 pounds, which surprised the heck out of me. And that's empty. So you need to decide if you want to be hauling something that weighs 15 pounds out of your cupboard every time you want to use it, or once you add 5 pounds worth of stew or whatever in here, do you want to be carrying 20 pounds across a parking lot anytime you go to a potluck? So that's a couple things you just might want to keep in mind when you're selecting. Um, some of the newer models, well, most of the newer models are digital. Mine are all older and they're high, medium, low, manual select. A few of them will let you program them through your smartphone. And then we also, some of the newer models also let you saute in this actual crock on the stovetop. You can brown your meat and then move the crock over into the slow cooker appliance and complete your cooking there. So that's kind of a benefit of using one of those newer models. Slow cooking is really economical. It costs about the same amount of money to use to turn on an incandescent light bulb as it does to run a slow cooker. So you're not using a lot of electricity. You're not turning on your stove. You're not heating up your kitchen, so your air conditioner doesn't have to keep up in the summertime. And they're also economical because you can buy inexpensive cuts of meat. The slow cooking in moisture breaks down all the connective tissue in your meat and makes it really tender. If you buy an expensive cut of meat that does not have much connective tissue in it, it won't perform nearly as well in a slow cooker. So you can save a lot of money by doing your meals with cheaper cuts of meat. Some of the benefits, I love the one pot cleanup. I think that's a plus for everybody. You're usually using less oil to cook. All you usually use oil for is to brown your meat and maybe some of your vegetables. So the less oil you use, the better. And on a stove or in an oven, you might require more. And when pressure cooking is really fast, which Denise is going to talk to you about, pressure cooking in Instapots. This is something you can plug it in the morning, go for your day, and come back and have a meal ready. It does take a little planning. I take my meat and my vegetables, cook my meat and cut up my vegetables the night before and store everything in the refrigerator. When I come down in the morning, I can throw everything in the crock pot, put my liquid and my herbs in and plug it in and go. And I know when I come back home, it's going to be done. So those are really good benefits. And just one more comment about slow cookers. If you're looking to buy a new one, almost any slow cooker will do a great job on a chicken dish. It's the beef and potatoes and carrots dishes that are sometimes a challenge. And my best advice to you is to know your slow cooker before you plug it in and go away for a day. I used the round one yesterday to make one batch of my beef stew. And it cooked, I forgot, it had been a long time since I used it, I forgot, and it cooked, even at low, it cooked a lot faster than this slow cooker that I'm used to. So that batch was done about 2 hours early than this batch. So just know before you leave the house what you need to expect. So before we move to the beef, making our Irish stew, Lainey, are there any questions?
Oh, any questions? I do not think so.
Okay.
At this point.
Okay. All right. So I have pre-prepared some of the ingredients for our Irish stew. This is a fantastic comfort food dish, and the recipe says 2 ounces of chuck roast. I have yet to find 2 pounds of chuck roast. I can't find a 2-pound chuck roast anywhere. They're all giant. So I buy it and I prepare the entire chuck roast. I cut it all into bite-sized pieces. An easy way to get the flour and salt and pepper on your meat is to lay it out on a cookie sheet, sprinkle your flour over the top, add your salt and pepper, and then just kind of fluff it with your hands. And then you can cook it in your 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Then you'll pull out what you want for your beef stew recipe, and you can freeze the rest of it, and you don't have to go through that the next time. So here is an example of your cooked beef. I gotta be careful I don't dump it out. This has already been cooked in the flour, and the flour is optional, but if you do use it, it will help to thicken the broth that you put in to your slow cooker and make that nice thick gravy that you have. My onions have already been browned here, so you can hopefully see what those are looking like. When you load your slow cooker, your meat will, 90% of the time, your meat will go on the bottom. The only exception to that is if you're using tuberous root vegetables like sweet potatoes. They need to cook longer, and they need to actually be in the moisture in order for them to cook to their best doneness. So if you are using those, put those in first, then your meat, then throw in your onions. For this stew, you'll add in your 1/2 cup of broth and your 2 bay leaves, and you'll cook that for 4 hours. At 4 hours, you'll have to take the lid off and add your carrots and potatoes. Keep in mind, please have your carrots and potatoes kind of right there beside you in a bowl. Every time you lift the lid from your slow cooker, you need to add 30 minutes to your cooking time. That blew me away. But it takes that long for the cooler ingredients to get up to the temperature of what's already in there, and for your slow cooker to recycle and get back up to the temperature that it needs to be. So if you're like me, and I admit, I lift my slow cooker lid probably 3-4 times a day, sometimes just to smell it, or just to stir it or take a taste. So that's a habit I'm going to have to cut back on. So once you've got all of your things, your meat and onions and broth in your slow cooker, you've cooked it for 4 hours, quickly open it up, put your potatoes and carrots in, and let it go for another 3 to 4 hours. If you're cooking something that has small vegetables like corn or peas or sliced mushrooms, add those items during the last 30 to 45 minutes of cooking, and don't put them in frozen. Be sure you always bring them to room temperature, or again, you'll throw off the heat inside your slow cooker and it won't finish correctly. Another thing that you need to keep in mind if you're making something like stroganoff, the dairy products need to go in the last 30 minutes of cooking. That way they won't break apart. I usually make my whole batch of stroganoff, pull out the individual servings, and put the sour cream or the yogurt on the top. That way each person can regulate how much they get, and whatever is left over in my pot can be frozen and thawed without the dairy products breaking apart. So that's just an option. Okay, so now we've got this gorgeous pot of beef stew. What are we going to do with it? Well, we have several options today for you to serve it. First of all, I've put a helping of it in just a plain bowl. As you can see, we still have nice big carrot chunks. They've stayed together nicely. The potatoes are still nice and big, and the meat has not fallen apart, but it's extremely tender. So you can put that in a bowl with a little parsley. I also made a homemade Irish bread that you can serve with that. Add a tossed salad or some fruit and you have a complete meal. Another Irish tradition, and I figure if you're going to go cultural, let's go cultural all the way. Another Irish tradition is to serve your beef stew with Irish mashed potatoes. So I made a batch of Irish mashed potatoes, put them on the plate, and topped it with my beef stew. And now you can get a bite of mashed potatoes with each bite of stew. And in this stew, I did not put potatoes in the slow cooker. I used those same potatoes to make the Irish mashed potatoes. Another way you can serve this is putting it in a bread bowl. I love to go to the restaurants where they had their soup in a bread bowl. Now, this is all the same basic Irish stew recipe. I can't serve anything the same way twice, sorry. So there's a way to change this quickly into an Italian version of beef stew. You would, instead of using beef stock, you would add an 8-ounce can of tomato paste. And any of these are going to change your nutrition information, but just keep that in mind. As you can tell, there's not a lot of difference in the appearance of the Italian version versus the Irish version. The Italian version is a little bit darker from the tomato paste. You would also add in celery, basil, marjoram, sage, and thyme for your Italian spices. And I made some little herbed polenta crackers to serve with that. So you can get a complete Italian experience. And lastly, I also made a Greek version of this stew. You would add in celery when you are, and saute it with your onions when you're preparing that. And then you would add in allspice berries, not the ground allspice, and a little bit of nutmeg. Top it with a little bit of plain yogurt, and you've got a Greek version. I added some crusty bread. Peasant bread is a big thing for Greek food, comfort food. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 5 different ways that you can prepare your beef stew. Lainey, do we have any questions?
Yes, ma'am. Can you substitute a non-wheat flour in this recipe?
I would say yes. And you don't have to use flour at all. But if you have almond flour or anything else like that, you can bake with it. So you should be able to cook your meat in it too. Or you just don't use flour in the recipe.
All right. And we had a question, if you could give us a little more information on using a slow cooker with ingredients in a frozen state. Can you use any ingredients in a frozen state?
Okay, you should use no ingredients in a frozen state. And I may not have made that real clear. Anytime you put something frozen into your slow cooker, you are bringing the temperature down so much that, and it takes so long to recover that you may not get your food back up to the temperature it should be where it's safe to consume within the appropriate amount of time. So everything that goes in your slow cooker should be like room temperature or just coming right out of the refrigerator when you first turn it on.
All right. Thank you for that. Do you know of a way to check a slow cooker to make sure it is functioning at the correct temperature?
I do not. If one of our other volunteers has information on that, feel free to speak up. I don't. I just know what I expect to happen in my slow cooker because I've used it for so many years. And when something else happens in a different slow cooker and it cooked my stew so much quicker, I wasn't watching for it, so I was surprised. So again, just know what your slow cooker does.
All right. And how are Irish mashed potatoes different from regular mashed potatoes?
You can look up the recipe online. There, it's called Cole Cannon, and it has cabbage and milk, and you cook all that down. Not low calorie, I'm sure, but they're very tasty. Cabbage, milk, butter, a little bit of nutmeg. Combine that with your mashed potatoes and broil it.
All right. And last one we have, back to the flour. What does the flour do to the flavor of the meat?
So the flour helps sear the meat so that all the juice stays inside each cube. And it will sear a little faster in the oil if the flour is on there. But the second purpose of the flour is when you add your broth in, the flour helps thicken the broth. So it's not really a flavor type of thing as it is it's a helpful, it helps you get the end result you want.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sherry.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and we were going to move on to Denise now with our last recipe. And here we go, Denise.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Anne and Sherry. Those are looking amazing. I'm going to have to decide what I'm going to have for lunch. It's kind of getting to be that time. I am going to demonstrate our third method of cooking a soup or a stew in our electric pressure cooker. So first of all, the question is, why the electric pressure cooker? The big answer to that is, of course, is time. Sherry kind of touched on that a little bit, between the difference between the slow cooker. But you can take a recipe in electric pressure cooker, one that you would cook on the stovetop or in the oven, and the cook time could be a half to 2/3 of the time less than what it would be, like I said, on the stovetop or the oven. So that is a big factor to it. But of course, like Sherry had also mentioned, it kind of depends on your lifestyle and what your preference is. One thing about the electric pressure cooker, I would not set this and leave the house because it does cook in such a much quicker time. There are safety features in it, as far as it is a very safe method of cooking. If you remember the original pressure cooker that you would cook on the stove, there was a lot less control on that. But this really is pretty much a one-step. You load your stuff in there, you set your button, and you don't need to touch it. It is manufactured to regulate the temperature and even has safety reasons that if it needs to, it will shut off on its own. So those are some of the reasons for using the electric pressure cooker. So anyway, like I said before, it basically works the same function as the original stovetop method of building up the steam in there and coming to pressure and pressurizing the food in there to cook quickly. So it really is kind of like the old saying goes, set it and forget it type function. So if you'd like to follow along, I am going to demonstrate the chicken tortilla soup, and I believe it is on page 15 of your booklet if you'd like to follow along. So we've got it started here. And the first thing we're going to put in there is our chicken breast. And that's the other nice thing about this recipe. You pretty much just put everything in there, turn it on, and it's ready to go. And that is one nice thing I like about this recipe. The next thing is a can of your diced tomatoes with chilies. And I forgot to mention before I started loading this, inside here is a steel pot. Your insert, very important. You want to make sure that that is in here before you start adding liquid into here, because your heating element is down in there, and that if you add that in there, you very well could ruin your electric pressure cooker, and that would be a very sad day for all. So anyway, going back to our recipe, we've added our diced tomatoes with the green chilies. And the next thing I'm going to add is some diced tomatoes. I'm choosing to use a jar of diced tomatoes that I have previously preserved from my garden from earlier this year. Anne touched on the factors of using canned ingredients, and a big factor in that is your salt content, your sodium. Everybody should only have 2,300 milligrams of sodium a day, and that's if you don't have health issues as far as like diabetes or kidney disease. Then it's down to 1,500 milligrams a day. So usually when you've got canned ingredients, that really can kind of boost up your sodium content quite quickly. And we're going to talk about some of those. So like I said, I used my previous jarred preserved tomatoes, and I know how much salt is in there because I did it, and that is 0, which is nice. We've got a regular can of petite tomatoes right here, and there's 180 milligrams in that one. Here is a no salt added, and that's 15 milligrams. So right there is a big difference as far as your milligrams. And then just for comparison, I got a seasoned, a flavored can. These are chili ready, and there is 300 milligrams of sodium in there. So once again, it jumps up pretty quickly. Next, we've got our frozen corn and our jalapenos and our garlic. Once again, it is frozen. I put it in there. And then I've also got my onions here that I've previously chopped and put those in there. That's another nice factor about this recipe. Often, like in Anne's recipe, you had to saute the onions quite often in many recipes. You saute the onions and the garlic ahead of time, but in this recipe, it's not necessary. So that also makes it nice. I have already added, let's go to black beans. I almost missed black beans. We want to forget those. So next we've got black beans. I have, like Anne had mentioned, I also make my whole bag of black beans, and I freeze those, like Anne had mentioned, into freezer bags. And then when I need black beans or any other beans, I have those and I pull those out. So just for sodium comparison again, like in your packet, here's our black beans. A bag of beans and black beans cook up wonderfully in the electric pressure cooker. If you did a bag of beans on the stovetop, it would take about 1.5 hours to 2 hours of cooking on the stovetop. In the electric pressure cooker, if you had soaked those ahead of time, it would take 5 to 9 minutes. And if you did not soak them, which sometimes you just forget to soak them overnight, it would only take 25 minutes of pressure time to cook. And there is a recipe in your booklet for those too. So going back to the beans, of course, in the bag, and Anne had mentioned some other pluses for using the dried beans. There are 0 milligrams of sodium in that. And then let's do this one first. Here is a reduced sodium, and there's 210 milligrams of sodium in that one. And then in just a regular, there's 450. So as you can tell, it can add up quite quickly on that. Next, we have our broth or stock. Okay, the question is, what's the difference between broth or stock? Basically, they're the same thing, and quite often, unless you have a fine palate to discern the difference of them, broth is defined as a liquid with a piece of meat cut in it. So if you have a pot of water, cook a piece of chicken in it, you've got that liquid that's left over is broth, which is tasty as it is. Sometimes if you're making it as broth though, you would add vegetables and maybe some seasonings. And then stock, the difference on that is the use of animal bones, and it's simmered in that liquid. And by doing that, you're pulling out the collagen from inside those bones, which makes it maybe a touch creamier or smoother, or maybe a thicker, I guess, if that's the way to describe that, between the two of them. And And a broth is used more for when you are just trying to enhance the flavor of something. So if you were going to maybe cook rice or even put it in your potatoes, that's kind of the recommendation. Whereas a stock, when you want that flavor to really be a big flavor in it rather than just enhancing something. So I make my own bone broth in my electric pressure cooker, which is quite simple. Anytime we have chicken with any kind of bones, I take those and I put those in a freezer bag in my freezer. Anytime I'm cooking, those ends and bits, like when I cut an onion, the skins and the ends, or the carrots that I shred, or celery, the tops, all those parts that you would probably just either typically throw away or compost, I put those in another freezer bag and I put that in the freezer. When I got those about halfway full, I put those in my pot and fill it up with water. You can put some different aromatics in it, and you cook it. And within 2 hours, you've got this thick, not thick, creamy almost bone broth that you can use. And once again, like Ann said, I would take that, divide that into containers and put that in the freezer, and then I pull them out when I need them. So there's also another use for your electric pressure cooker. There's also a recipe for that in your booklet. So moving on with our recipe, let's go back. We've talked about our tomatoes and we have added our black beans. And then next is our broth, which I have already put that in there so we didn't have to splash that around here. Sodium content on broth. These were big ones to me. So we've got just a standard broth. I got my papers mixed up. So we've got a standard broth and it has 570 milligrams of sodium. This is 33% less sodium. I'm sorry, I messed up. On the regular broth, there's 860 milligrams of sodium in a serving. And in the 33% less, there is 570. And then here's an unsalted one, and it has 40 milligrams of sodium. So as you can see, it really can add up quite quickly if you don't pay attention to what your sodium levels, what your sodium is, if you just haphazardly dump sodium in, dump your cans in there. So just something to be aware of is your sodium level. And then we've got our seasonings, and I had already measured those out ahead of time. We've got the cumin, the chili powder, the salt, and the pepper. So we've got all that in here. Give it a little stir. And now, to start,